Great, thank you. And thank you for accommodating me. I really wish I could have been there in person today, but virtual is great, and happy that I could talk to you all a little bit today about emotion and language and how that impacts aquatic plant management. As it's a theme with a lot of my work, it's combining social science with the physical science to help improve aquatic invasive species management. So, uh, kind of jumping right in, just wanted to share a couple of examples of invasive species communication that pulled from the internet yesterday. So when we communicate, I think a lot of times we're trying to make not just communicate information, but also make people feel things. And a lot of invasive species communication, really leans into militaristic and nativist metaphors. So here's just a couple of examples of, militaristic metaphors about invasive carp, or kind of the classic like weed warriors for especially groups that work in terrestrial vegetation management. And again, like this probably makes you feel something. Some people might feel motivated. Some people might feel anxious or have a lot of negative emotion associated with this because like war is not a happy topic. But it makes you feel something. And the same with kind of this really fear-based messaging. Like Starry Stonewort is a lake killer. I don't know what a lake killer is. I don't know if it drains lakes, or I don't know exactly what it does, but it sounds scary and makes me feel anxious, right? And likely it probably makes you feel something too. And where I'm going with this is, I think when we start thinking about how people behave, we can look at different models of human behavior. And what I think was the dominant model for a long time was this kind of really rational, like Homo economicus kind of view of people, where people make decisions based, kind of in their economic interest and self-interest. And if you understand what's in the interest of people, that's how they're making decisions. So it's kind of this like, person directing a chariot. They're totally in charge of where they're going and just like the master of their domain. But as behavioral psychology and social sciences kind of evolved over the recent past, that what's closer to reality is more of a person riding an elephant metaphor, or that people are predictably irrational. Like you are not, or there are very predictable ways that you act against your own self-interest. And really it's kind of this idea that, the person riding the elephant is the rational thinking brain that's, weighing the pros and cons of things. And you think you're in charge, but you can only be so in charge of the elephant, which is your more kind of automatic emotional brain that's just reacting to things. And if you're familiar with the book Thinking Fast and Slow, like the slow thinking is the human, or like the rider who's kind of trying to weigh the pros and cons and make rational decisions. But then you also have this fast thinking kind of reactionary brain that's, subconsciously taking in all this information and reacting. And so, rationally, we know that we truly aren't at war with invasive species, or invasive species aren't lake killers. These things don't have agency. Like people purposely or accidentally brought them places, and now they're causing us problems, right? And we're using this language to try to motivate people to take action. But while we rationally know this, does your kind of elephant or your emotional brain know this? Probably not. It's reacting to the language and the metaphors that we're seeing. And so this has really been an interest of my work for the past, 10 years or so. And I commonly hear it among kind of both lake managers and lake groups of just how are we reacting to new populations of invasive species? Like when we find starry stonewort someplace and use a bunch of language that might kind of make people fearful or anxious, like how are they reacting? Are they thinking really fast and thinking like reacting and we need to do something, and you want to do the thing that seems like you're doing the most, which maybe oftentimes is an herbicide treatment. Like that looks like a pretty active response. But if you maybe take a step back and are more thoughtful in planning, you might not immediately jump to herbicides, which are known to have non-target impacts to our lake ecosystems. You might look at some monitoring. You might do some more planning and really thoughtful, engaging kind of decision making that will get you to outcomes that align with people's values. And so this is again been a topic of research and interest of mine for the past 10 plus years. And so I just wanted to share some related work that might help you all think about how to communicate about invasive species in the future. We have a waterfront property owner survey, which I think summarizes what people think about aquatic plant management and what drives some of the decisions around it. How people look for information using search engines and what information they are getting versus what's out there. And then some aquatic invasive species metaphor message tests, which shows how people are reacting to our messaging. And I think altogether we can use this use this information to improve our aquatic invasive species management messaging. So for our Wisconsin waterfront property owner survey, we administered this survey in 2020. We had a sample from a statewide data set of waterfront property owners created by UW Extension, or the UW Stevens Point Extension Lakes program. They have a data set that has every single waterfront property and the mailing address. At this point in time, it's 6+ years old, so probably needs a little bit of updating. But we had an initial sample of 1,200 individuals that owned property or waterfront property in Wisconsin. We made sure to have a different types of properties on lakes that are or waters that are uncolonized with AIS, waters that were recently colonized with aquatic plants, and those that have well-established invasive aquatic plant populations. And we had over more than a 50% response rate, which is really great for this kind of work. So this is just like really high level, some of the interesting findings. Like there's a whole report we could dive into some other time if you'd like. But some key findings from this report was that waterfront property owners aren't as familiar with some aquatic plant management approaches. Very few people are very or extremely familiar with pretty much any management approach that are on lakes. And most people, at most have somewhat knowledge or like a median amount of knowledge. And a lot of things that we might consider as management options, like herbicide monitoring, biological control, physical, like people don't know much about these things. So that's a clear knowledge gap in aquatic plant management. And we also asked about emotions and when people think about managing aquatic invasive species in their lake. The thing that kind of jumped out at us was that there's a non-negligible part of the population, about 50%, that are feeling some negative emotions when managing aquatic invasive species on their lake. And if you're feeling negative emotions, you're tapping into kind of that more thinking fast part of your brain. On the plus side, there's a lot of curiosity that exists within aquatic plant or invasive species management on lakes. So, highlighted like that knowledge gap from before, I think we can capitalize on this curiosity. Like people want to know more about their lakes. And so there's an opportunity to give people this information. And so we took all this survey data, made created a model to try to understand the preference for herbicide treatment of invasive plants in lakes. And something that jumped out at us was that kind of negative affect, or that negative emotions, angry, sad, frustrated, was a significant driver for the preference of herbicide treatments in lakes. So if people are feeling anxious, they jump to herbicide treatment before looking at all the different management actions, and that's what they prefer. There's also some other significant factors. I think an interesting one is whether or not people believe aquatic invasive species are in their lake. It's not the actual presence, it's whether or not they believe there are invasive species in the lake. And interestingly enough, people were not able to accurately predict whether or not they had invasive species in their lake. People were right or wrong 50% of the time, so it's kind of random as to whether or not people could accurately predict it. So just the perception of invasive species appears to be related to preference for herbicide treatments over other management options. And so there's also different perceptions of risks and benefits of aquatic plant management approaches, like manual and mechanical and monitoring seem to be, thought of as pretty beneficial with not a lot of risks, and chemical, biological control, more risks than benefits. But still, even though a lot of people feel like there are risks with chemical treatment, or herbicide treatment, people seem to be preferring that and jumping to that. Again, I think because of some of the negative emotion that people feel with aquatic invasive species. So, summing up some of our waterfront property owner survey, is that there's clear knowledge gaps on aquatic plant management approaches that could be addressed. We could share more information about our management, and there's a range of emotions that exist when thinking about aquatic plant management, including negative ones. So we should think about how to try to minimize some of the negative emotions, or maybe not make decisions based purely when we are feeling strong negative emotions, and capitalize on the curiosity that exists within waterfront property owners. And negative emotions related to preference for herbicide treatment. And so I think this held true even when it was clarified that it could do more damage to native plants than invasive species themselves. So I think we need to think a little bit about how we can maybe manage some of those negative emotions. And finally, aquatic plant management decisions aren't always being made in line with the stated values of people. Lake organizations want a healthy lake that they can use with healthy and balanced aquatic plant populations and healthy fisheries. And so, what decisions can we make with that in mind, not just, solely controlling invasive species, which sometimes might be at odds with some of those other goals. So after that research, we trying to think of different mechanisms for why people are feeling negative emotions, or why are they jumping to herbicides right away versus kind of thinking about this broader set of management approaches. And I think pretty much everyone these days, when they have a problem that they want to learn more about, they either have a friend that knows something about it, so they talk to them, or they Google it. And I'm guessing most people probably Google things first. And so if you Google something generic, like I have a new invasive species in my lake, you're going to get different things based on that search versus recent discovery of Eurasian water milfoil. And so here's just a couple of Google searches I've done using a more kind of specific term, starry stonewort, on the left. And if you use a more specific term, you get more agency kind of authoritative websites. But on the right, I typed in something generic, like I have too many lake weeds. And if you type in that, you get more commercial websites or these blogs talking about control, often promoting herbicide control. And so, again, how you search for information matters. And we did a research project where we looked at more than 1,000 different keywords related to aquatic plant management, and then kind of categorized and quantified the top 10 websites for each of those Google search pages. Good work, Luke, our graduate student, on that. It was a lot of work. But what we found was that the language we use, both on our websites, impacts how people find our information. And depending on the language people use to search for information, that impacts what information comes up for them. So if we use like invasive terms, like just calling something invasive, specific terms like a common name, scientific names, you're more likely to get agencies or universities. So you can kind of think of that as more like technical language. But if you use negative language, like lake weeds are bad, or I want to kill lake weeds, anything related to control, or kind of vernacular common language, you're more likely to get commercial websites. So to us, we think that we have waterfront property owners that maybe don't have the same level of ecological knowledge as the professionals working on these lake management issues, and they're not looking for things the same way that we're writing that information up. So they're probably not even finding information about other management approaches when people are looking for things. They're probably finding these commercial websites or these blogs that tend to be steering a little bit more towards herbicide control. So our agency and university information likely isn't even showing up in front of most people looking for it. And so I'd encourage people, myself included, to think more about who we're trying to reach in the language that they're using to find this information and to communicate about this or these topics, and try to include that language in any communications about it, so that way it's discoverable. And if you can't do that for various reasons, at least be aware of it and the trade-offs you're making in your language. So lastly, we've also been thinking about what makes people feel bad about aquatic invasive species. I mean, it's not exactly an uplifting topic. These species are coming in, usually by accident, and uh, we are they're causing us problems, and it's really hard to manage them. And when you look at news headlines about invasive species, uh, we're losing the war, they're the worst nightmare. I mean, again, doesn't make people feel great. And I think the message frames we intuitively use, like just are kind of steering towards eliciting negative emotions. Nativist metaphors kind of give you that um, immigration, not from here, othering feeling that doesn't feel great. The militaristic ones can also elicit some negative information. And a related study in 2022 about public health messaging that uses a lot of the same kind of negative emotion framings. It triggers a lot more anxiety, but not better outcomes in the public health world. So I think that's something for us to think about. And when we used these drawings on the left plus a couple of other ones to test them in an invasive species context. At no point were militaristic and nativist metaphors more effective at communicating than a protective one, a fact-based science one, or like a stop aquatic hitchhiker-based frame. They were never more effective. And for us, I think it begs the question, why do we lean into these frames so much when they're not more effective and they have, unintended consequences of, producing anxiety? If you look at it from like a big data standpoint, we had a researcher at UW look at all of the different Facebook posts from all the different groups that could potentially share information about invasive species, and none of the posts with militaristic or nativist messaging had better engagement. So again, it's not working better, and it has unintended consequences. So how we talk about invasive species really matters. It can drive preferences for different management approaches, have negative impacts, make people feel anxious, can make it tough to find our information. And this kind of loaded language that we think is more effective doesn't seem to be more effective when we look at the data on it. So how can we do better? Wrapping up, I think we can fill aquatic plant management knowledge gaps with just basic information on management approaches. We can implement processes that help environmental groups make decisions that align with their values. I think a lot of the planning efforts people are engaging in help do that. As communicators, we can have our language better align with the language of the people we're trying to reach and making sure that it's discoverable to them. And I think we can be intentional with the metaphors and language we use and being proactive in trying to limit the unintended consequences of it. If we're using something because we think it's going to be engaging, just try to imagine how the full range of people or how people might react to that, and not just how people might ideally react to it. So at that, a little closer to 20 minutes than I wanted, but happy to answer any questions on the chat or via email, which is on the right. Also, again, sorry I could not be there, but Scott McComb, the Wisconsin Sea Grant Southeast Wisconsin AIS coordinator, is in attendance today. So he has the papers I mentioned or presented on and can happily answer any questions on some of these topics. So thank you. And you all are still muted, but
Okay. There you go. Okay, sorry about
yeah.
that. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, no problem.
And Scott's in the room. And does anyone question? I think we have time for one maybe, but with that, no, I think we're good, Tim. Oh wait, was there no? So Cindy, yep, question.
Maybe you can repeat it.
I'll repeat it.
I'm interested, how can we apply these lessons learned for invasive species to other things we're trying to work on, like dam removal?
Good question. Tim, the question was, how can we apply these lessons learned with invasive species to other issues like dam removal?
It's a great question. I wish I could help with it because I think it's a lot of fun to apply these communication lessons to other topics. But I think that my first step would be just linking up with either extension or Sea Grant professionals that are interested in those topics. And I think that I've been working with other communication professionals to try to share information across our topic areas. And I think that if you were to kind of connect with somebody from Sea Grant or Extension, I think we could help you talk through some of these things and how to apply them, because the principles apply across topics. It's just making sure you have somebody with both the communication expertise and some content knowledge to make sure it's all framed correctly and applicable to your target audience. So reach out to your local extension agent, and I'm sure they're happy to help.